Eastern Front, January 1945. Snow falling in thick, wind-blown sheets. A white silence broken only by distant artillery thunder and the grinding echo of armor moving somewhere beyond the tree. On a frozen ridge outside the battered village of Leysen, a single German Panther Osf. G sat half buried in a drift, its engine coughing weakly. Its right track snapped and curled like a broken spine. Steam rose from the ruptured radiator grill. Snow hissed where it touched the overheated hull. Inside the tank, Unteroffizier Lukas Reinhardt, 24 years old, wiped frost from the periscope with the edge of his glove. The wind knifed across the open fields, carrying the distant rumble of approaching engines. Soviet engines. Corporal Meissner slammed the radio handset down. "Radio's dead, Lucas." Fried when the radiator blew. "We're blind and stranded." Reinhardt didn't respond. He couldn't afford to, because the sound coming over the ridge wasn't infantry. It was armor. A lot of armor. Private Dietrich's voice trembled. "Sounds like 3, maybe 4 T-34s. Meissner corrected him grimly. 5. At least 5. And they're coming straight down the road. Reinhardt adjusted the gunner's scope. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42L/70, one of the most feared tank guns of the war, still sat perfectly aligned, its optics unbroken. The turret electrics were weak, but functional. The loader's rack still carried shells. They had firepower. They just couldn't move. And for a tank crew on the Eastern Front, immobility was a death sentence. Dietrich swallowed hard. We abandoned the tank, right? Foot out through the woods before they crest the ridge. But Reinhardt kept his eye behind the scope. "No, we stay." Meissner stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Stay in an Immobile Panther. Lucas, if they flank us, we're done." "They won't flank us," Reinhardt said quietly. He traced the terrain with his eye. A funnel-shaped valley, high snowbanks, a narrow approach road. The Soviets will come straight down the center. They're expecting a retreating column, not a crippled tank lying in wait. Dietrich exhaled, breath fogging. "So what do we do?" Reinhardt slid a gloved hand across the snow-dusted breech block. "We make them believe this Panther is still alive." Meissner scoffed. "It is alive." Reinhardt shook his head. "No, it's dying." He chambered the first round. "But before it dies, it's going to take as many of them with it as we can." Outside, the engine sputtered one last groaning cough, then died with a clank. Silence swallowed the ridge. Moments later, Soviet tanks crested the tree line. 5 silhouettes in the blizzard, engines revving, closing fast, unaware that the crippled Panther ahead of them was not a wreck to circumvent, but a trap waiting to strike its final blows. In the span of the next 12 minutes, Reinhardt's Immobile Panther would do the impossible: knock out 4 enemy tanks without moving a single meter. And in doing so, it would turn a hopeless mechanical failure into a legend whispered among tank crews long after the war. Snow hammered the Panther's hull like grains of salt against iron as the Soviet column advanced, their silhouettes swelling from vague smudges to hulking shapes. Through the gunner's TZF-12 scope, Reinhardt could now distinguish details. The sloped glassy plates of T-3485S, their turrets rocking slightly with each churn of the tracks, exhaust plumes trailing like smudged charcoal against the white blur of the storm. Meissner crouched beside him, whispering sharply, "We should be gone, Lucas. If they get close enough to see, we're immobile." "They won't," Reinhardt whispered back, his eye glued to the optic. Not yet. He wasn't being reckless. He was reading the terrain with the cold precision of a hunter who knew the kill depended not on speed, but on patience. The crippled Panther sat angled down the slope, its gun already aligned with the approach road. Snowbanks on either side forced the Soviets into a single file, an armored bottleneck. Dietrich hugged his arms around himself. "They'll spot the broken track." "They'll spot nothing," Reinhardt said. "Visibility is 50 meters at best, and they expect us to be running, not waiting." The loader, Weber, breathed softly through chattering teeth. "What's our first target?" Reinhardt didn't hesitate. "The lead tank." Meissner frowned. "They'll know we're here if we fire." "That's the idea." The ambush begins. The first T-34 emerged from the storm like a charging bull, turret forward. bow wave of snow pushing in front of its tracks. It was close, much closer than any German gunner preferred for long barrel accuracy. But Reinhardt didn't need range. He needed certainty. He steadied the crosshairs on the base of the turret, right above the driver's hatch. 8-piece BC, he murmured. Weber slammed the shell into the breech. Loaded. Reinhardt exhaled slowly. His heartbeat slowed. Fire. Crackle. The recoil shuddered through the steel hull. Snow fell from the Panther's turret roof in a sheet. The shell streaked out, a glowing ember against the storm. Then it struck. The T-34's turret jerked as if punched by a giant fist. A plume of fire burst from the commander's cupola. The tank skidded sideways, tracks digging into the snow before the engine stalled mid-growl. Dietrich gasped. One shot, one kill. Reinhardt didn't look up from the scope. Next target. Load. Confusion in the Soviet column. The second T-34 braked hard, nearly colliding with the wreck of the first. Its turret whipped left, then right, searching blindly for where the shot came from. They expected a mobile German force retreating through the village, not a crippled Panther facing them head-on. Weber rammed another shell into the breech. Loaded. Angle 8 degrees left. Reinhardt ordered. Meissner hesitated. That's a ricochet angle. Reinhardt cut him off. Just do it. The Soviet gunner had just enough time to start swiveling his turret toward the ridge when Reinhardt fired again. Boom, thump. The shell struck the forward slope, punched through at a downward angle, and erupted inside the fighting compartment. Flames shot from the hull seams. The turret hatch blown open by internal pressure. The second T-34 wasn't disabled. It was annihilated. Dietrich swallowed hard. That's two. The Soviets adapt, but not fast enough. The third T-34 reversed sharply, trying to swing out of the bottleneck into the tree line. Snow and mud spit from under its tracks. Meissner cursed. They'll flank us. But Reinhardt shook his head. No, trees are too dense on that side. They'll get stuck. And he was right. The tank's right track bogged down in the snow-heavy branches. Its turret rotated violently, barrel sweeping the storm in wide arcs. Loaded, round, and Reinhardt tracked the tank's turret ring, a weak spot even at a bad angle. He fired. Crack. The shot hit the thick front slope, but then ricocheted, skipping upward, slamming into the turret ring. Sparks flared. The turret jammed crooked, then seized completely. Not a kill, but enough. They can't traverse, Reinhardt said. Next, the Panther begins to die. A warning groan shivered through the hull as the overheated gun breech hissed steam. The ruptured radiator had already cooked internal components. Every shot risked a thermal jam. Weber wiped his gloves. Guns heating too fast. We don't stop, Reinhardt said firmly. Outside. The fourth Soviet tank pushed the burned wrecks aside with brute force, its tracks grinding metal against metal. Flames illuminated its armor with a hellish orange glow. Dietrich whispered, "They know where we are now." "Yes," Reinhardt said, "and that's when they'll make mistakes." The fourth T-34 fired blindly. Home. A shell screamed overhead, detonating the trees behind them. Branches rained down. Meissner ducked. "They'll zero us in." "They don't have time," Reinhardt said. "Snow's too thick. Optics useless." The fourth kill. Weber shoved another shell in. Loaded. Reinhardt aimed at the T-34's exposed lower glacis, a small target. But the Panther's long 75 millimeters could pierce it even in bad visibility. He fired. Crack bump. The shell hit low. The T-34 lurched as its transmission shredded. Flames poured from beneath its hull. The turret slowed, then drooped. "That's for," Meissner breathed. "My God, for tanks while stuck in the snow." But the battle wasn't over. The fifth T-34 was still operational, and it had something the others didn't. A clear view of the muzzle flash. And now it was turning its gun directly at the crippled Panther. Reinhardt whispered, "And here's where the real fight begins." The fifth T-34 halted abruptly, its engine snarling through the swirling snowstorm. Unlike the others, it didn't push forward in panic or attempt a blind flanking maneuver. Its turret moved with deliberate precision, slow, measured, and deadly. Meissner froze. That gunner, he knows what he's doing. Reinhardt didn't answer. He was already watching the turret's rotation through the icy glass of a TZS scope. This Soviet wasn't firing wildly. He was tracking the flash pattern, counting seconds between German shots, mapping the Panther's approximate position. The Soviet commander leaned from his hatch, shouting directions to his gunner. His silhouette faint, but unmistakable against the storm. Dietrich whispered, "Sir, he's seen us." "Yes," Reinhardt murmured, "and he's patient." That made this tank far more dangerous than the first four. The Soviet gunner fires first. The T-34's cannon roared. Boom, karate. Snow burst skyward as a shell slammed into the ridge just below the immobilized Panther, showering the hull in icy shards and dirt clods. The Panther rocked violently. Weber yelped. "That almost took our track off completely." Meissner barked back. "We already have no track." Another shell slammed closer. The Soviet gunner was zeroing in. Reinhardt tightened his grip on the gun handles. "We have one advantage," he said quietly. Finch looked at him nervously. "And what's that?" Reinhardt's breath fogged the scope. "We're not moving. He thinks that's a weakness. Right now it's precision." The Panther fires under pressure. Weber repeat. "Fast. Loaded." Reinhardt lined up the sight. But the T-34 was already mid-rotation, its gun drawing a deadly arc that would intersect the Panther's exact position in seconds. He couldn't wait for a perfect shot. He fired. Crack, whump. The Panther shuddered. Snow leapt from its hull. The shell slammed into the T-34's upper glacis at a steep angle and ricocheted, throwing a white-hot spark into the storm. The tank didn't even slow down. Dietrich gasped. "It bounced." "Of course it bounced," Meissner snapped. "We're shooting up a bad angle." Reinhardt kept his eye in the scope. That was intentional. The others stared at him. A shot meant to miss. Reinhardt watched the Soviet tank closely. He'll think we misjudged. He'll stop adjusting elevation. He'll fire at our last muzzle flash. Meissner blinked. "You wanted him to think you missed?" Reinhardt didn't respond. He didn't need to. Outside, the T-34 lurched forward 2 meters, revealing something crucial. Its lower plate exposed for just a moment as it repositioned. Reinhardt whispered, "There you are." The Soviet gunner fires again, dangerously close. Boom, crash. A Soviet shell smashed into a pine tree above the Panther. The trunk split, crashing down inches from the turret roof. Weber flinched away. "He's got us bracketed. One more shot." "We don't give him one more shot," Reinhardt said. "The kill shot requires a sacrifice." Weber load AP. Now, Weber rammed the shell into the breach, nearly dropping it from numb fingers. Load it. Reinhardt rotated the turret manually. The electric traverse was weakening, stuttering with each grind. The Panther was dying by degrees, power dropping, hydraulics failing, optics fogging at the edges. But the gun still worked, and Reinhardt still had calculations left in him. Elevation now down there. Meissner's voice cracked. "Lukas, if we fire now, he fires too." Reinhardt's voice was almost a whisper. "I know." The 2 cannons fired together. The Soviet gun flashed. The Panther's muzzle flashed at the same instant. 2 thunderclaps merged into one, echoing across the ravine. The Russian shell hit first. Karakum. It slammed into the Panther's left hull side, punching through the skirt plate. Shrapnel blew inward, sparks showering the loader's feet. Weber screamed, but stayed standing. The Panther's shot hit half a second later. The AP shell streaked low, almost invisible, and buried itself beneath the T-34's bow, right where the armor dipped into the snow. A perfect shot, a shot only an immobile gun could have calculated in the blizzard. The T-34 lifted, literally lifted, as the explosion tore through the driver's compartment. Flames burst from the hull belly and ripped upward through the turret ring. The tank fell sideways, tracks spinning uselessly, smoke billowing from every seam. Dietrich stared, speechless. Meissner exhaled shakily. That's 4 tanks from a Panther that can't even move. Weber leaned against the loaders, rack trembling. And we're still alive. Reinhardt finally looked up from the scope, breath steady, voice calm. "No, we're not done yet." The others froze, because through the thinning snow, A sixth silhouette appeared. Larger, heavier, turret forward. Dietrich whispered in terror. "Is that a KV-1? Reinhardt confirmed with a single nod. Yes. He chambered a new round, the last armor-piercing shell they had. And now, he said quietly, we face the real threat. The wind shifted, sweeping the snow sideways and thinning the white curtain just enough for the crew to see the approaching silhouette clearly. It wasn't AT-34. It wasn't fast. It wasn't reckless. It was a KV-1, a steel giant of the early war, up-armored, up-gunned, and notoriously hard to kill. Most German crews preferred to avoid them unless they had range, speed, or both. Reinhardt's Immobile Panther had neither. Dietrich whispered what the others were thinking. We can't penetrate that one. Reinhardt didn't look away from a scope. Not from the front. No. Meissner crouched beside him, face pale. So what's the plan? We don't shoot the front. The KV-1 approaches, patient and methodical. Unlike the T-34s, the KV-1 didn't rush. It advanced slowly, almost cautiously. Turret facing the ridge like a watchful predator. This tank wasn't fooled by the wrecks of its comrades. It wasn't rushing into a kill funnel. It was studying the terrain. Gun depression on that thing is bad, Meissner muttered. But if it gets within 200 meters, it'll hit us even with poor optics. Reinhardt tightened his jaw. It's already within 300. The KV-1 rumbled closer, snow crumbling beneath its massive treads. Shots from earlier had carved scorched holes into the ice. Steam rising around its hull as it crossed the battlefield of burning Soviet machines. Its commander clearly understood the situation. A lone predator picking its way through the bodies of lesser beasts, searching for the one that had killed them. The Panther begins to fail. Inside the Panther, warning signs multiplied. The gun breech was glowing faintly. The turret traverse motor whined higher with each movement. Frost crept along the inside of the optics. Ammunition racks were nearly empty. Weber checked the shells. 1 AP left. 2. That's all. Dietrich looked horrified. He won't scratch a KV. No, Reinhardt agreed. But he can blind one. Meissner stared. You're going to use high explosive to create a visual block? Yes, Reinhardt said, and force him to turn. The setup shot. Weber, load heat. The loader hesitated. But that won't kill. It's not supposed to. Weber, Meissner barked. Do it. The shell slammed home. Reinhardt aimed not at the KV, but at the ground in front of it. Firing. Boom, crack. The he shell detonated in a violent burst of snow, ice, and mud, throwing a blinding cloud directly into the KV's face. The Soviet tank halted, its turret swinging instinctively toward the source of the explosion. Meissner's eyes widened. You forced his turret to turn, giving us a side angle. Exactly, Reinhardt said, but that only lasts seconds. The kill window appears and closes quickly. The KV turns slightly to reacquire the target. A tiny movement revealing the lower seam of its turret ring, the weakest point on the tank. And Reinhardt had 1 AP round left. Weber loaded it with shaking hands. Rounded, Reinhardt whispered, "This is it." Outside, the KV regained visibility. The turret began rotating back toward the Panther's position. The window was closing. Elevation steady. The KV's barrel steadied. Traverse left stop. The KV prepared to fire. Loaded, Weber whispered. Reinhardt's voice became steady steel. Firing. The shot that should work. Crack, whump. The AP shell screamed across the snowy field and struck the KV. Went exactly at the narrow band under the turret. A spark, a flash, then a muffled thud as the projectile punched through the ring and detonated inside. The KV jolted violently. Smoke belched from a seam. The turret froze mid-rotation. For 1 second, no one breathed. Then, carried him. A violent internal explosion burst through the hull roof, sending the commander's hatch flying into the air. The KV slumped in place, turret sagging, smoke rising like a funeral pyre. Meissner staggered backward. Holy Mother, he killed a kid. From a crippled Panther. Weber collapsed into a seat, laughing and crying at once. Dietrich whispered, "That was impossible." Reinhardt exhaled slowly. No, that was the last shot. The battlefield goes silent. The blizzard softened. The wrecks burned. The KV One sat dead among the T-34s. And the Panther, Immobile, dying and out of AP shells, had just destroyed 4 tanks and crippled a 5th in a battle it should never have survived. Reinhardt leaned back from a scope. It's done. But even as the others celebrated, he wasn't smiling, because he heard something far worse than tank engines. He heard boot steps, many of them, moving through the trees to their right. Meissner froze. Oh no, infantry. Soviet infantry. Reinhardt nodded. And they'll want revenge. The burning KV. One cast a dull orange glow across the snowy field, its flames licking upward into the gray sky. But behind that dying fire, from the tree line east of the Panther's position, the sound of movement grew louder. Heavy boots, rifles being slung forward, shouts in Russian cutting through the snowfall. Meissner swallowed hard. Infantry of full platoon, at least. Dietrich gripped his MP-40, hands trembling. They're coming right for us. They must have seen the muzzle flash. Reinhardt scanned the tree line through the periscope. He could see shadows moving between the pines, short, purposeful sprints from trunk to trunk. They were advancing with discipline, not fleeing, not disorganized, not panicked by the tank losses. These were line infantry, angry and determined. Weber checked the ammunition rack. No more repeat. 2 rounds. Meissner cursed. He isn't enough to break infantry in this snow. They'll just spread out. Reinhardt shook his head. That depends on where we put them. The Soviet infantry test the Panther. A rifle crack echoed, then another. Rounds pinged off the Panther's hull, chipping paint and rattling fragments inside the turret. They're testing distance, Reinhardt murmured, checking if anyone inside returns fire. Should we? Dietrich asked, raising his MP-40. Reinhardt held up a hand. No, not until we must. He could feel it, the rhythm of the Soviet approach. These troops were cautious but confident. They assumed any immobilized tank was abandoned, and they were coming to finish it up close. Meissner whispered, "They'll rush us with grenades, Molotovs, satchel charges." Reinhardt nodded. "They will." Then he pointed toward the KV, 1 wreck. "And that's where we'll stop them." The plan: turn their own wreck against them. Dietrich blinked. "The KV? Sir, it's burning out. It's not a threat anymore." "No," Reinhardt said, "but it's an explosion waiting to happen." Weber's eyes widened. "Oh, the ammo rack's inside?" Reinhardt confirmed. "The fire hasn't cooked off the secondary charges yet. If we hit the KV with heat, we can set them off. The blast will clear the field." Meissner snapped around. "But they aren't near it." "They will be," Reinhardt said. "They'll take cover behind it as they approach." Because the KV was large, tall, steel-sighted, the perfect blind for infantry. Load. The infantry takes the bait, as if choreographed. The Soviet infantry began shifting toward the KV. 1 wreck, just as Reinhardt predicted. They moved in 2 sections, using the burning giant as a shield against potential MG fire. Meissner exhaled. "They really think we abandoned this Panther." Dietrich whispered, "Won't they realize once we fire?" Reinhardt stayed steady behind the optic. "They'll realize too late." The infantry bunching increased. More shadows, more movement, more shapes gathering behind the KV's broad silhouette. Weber pushed the He shell into the breach. "Load it." Reinhardt counted the seconds. Watched the branches shift around the KV. Listened to the crunch of snow beneath approaching boots. He waited, then fire. The shot that turned the battlefield inside out. Crack, thump. The He shell struck the lower rear plate of the burning KV. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world tore open. The KV's ammo racks finally detonated, erupting in a geyser of flame and shrapnel that soared dozens of meters into the air. The explosion blew apart nearby trees, scorched the snow into steam, and engulfed the infantry sheltering behind the wreck. A wave of fire rolled outward, knocking men off their feet, even inside the Panther. The shockwave made the crew flinch. Dietrich stared, horrified and awestruck. That was 1 round? "No," Meissner said. "That was the whole KV going up." Reinhardt's voice remained calm. "Load or last heat." But before Weber could lift the shell, a shrill whistle cut the air. Dietrich's head snapped toward the woods. Mortars, new threat, indirect fire. A mortar round landed 30 meters away, blasting snow into a towering plume. Another struck short of the KV's flaming carcass. The Soviets were bracketing the ridge with 50 millimeters and 82 millimeters tubes. Meissner cursed. They're not charging anymore, they're suppressing us. Reinhardt nodded, which means they're calling for more troops. Dietrich peeked through a view slit, but sir, half their infantry is gone. Then, the other half will want revenge. The Panther's last weapon. Weber held the final round. What do we do with it? Reinhardt didn't hesitate. We removed the mortar crews. Meissner stared at him. With one round, Reinhardt pointed out toward the tree line. They're firing from a depression behind those pines. Hit the snow shelf above them, and we bury them. Weber slid the shell into the breech. Loaded. Reinhardt aimed high, adjusting elevation to a sharp angle. This is our last fire mission. He pulled the trigger. Boom. The shell arced into the storm and detonated high on the snow-covered bank. A massive slab of snow and ice sheared loose, avalanching down the slope. The mortar fire stopped instantly. Dietrich whispered, "You buried them alive." Reinhardt lowered his head. "Let's hope that's enough." The battlefield finally goes quiet. Minutes passed. No more engines, no more boots, no more mortars. Just the hiss of melting snow on hot steel. Meissner exhaled. "Lukas, you did it. Against tanks, infantry, mortars, while immobile." Reinhardt finally relaxed. "No," he said softly. "We did." But even as he spoke, he felt the Panther's hull temperature dropping. The old machine finally going cold. Their steel giant was dead, but its last stand had entered legend. The snowfall finally began to ease, revealing the battlefield Reinhardt's immobilized Panther had carved into the ridge. Flames flickered across shattered hulls. Smoke drifted low, like a wounded spirit crawling along the ground. The twisted wrecks of 4 T-34s glowed orange in the settling light, while the exploded KV. One lay torn open like a split furnace. Metal curled outward from the force of its own ammunition cooking off. The wind carried no gunfire, no engines, no shouting Soviet voices, just silence. The terrible, heavy silence after a storm that had nearly killed them all. Inside the Panther, Weber slid to the floor, exhausted. "We're out. No shells, no MG belts, nothing." Dietrich peered through the viewport, and no infantry left to advance. "They're gone." Meissner exhaled shakily, rubbing his face with numb hands. "We should have died out here." Reinhardt didn't answer. He wasn't celebrating. He was studying the valley below, the approach where 5 tanks and 2 waves of infantry had come at them. His voice was quiet. "Check for movement." They'd waited. Nothing. Not a single shadow shifted among the burning hulks. Weber finally managed a weary smile. "I think we broke them, Lukas." "No," Reinhardt said. "We stalled them." The cold reality. The Panther is finished. Reinhardt tapped the engine temperature gauge. Dead. The battery indicator. Nearly dead. The turret traverse. Unresponsive. The Panther had given all it could. Its steel heart was gone. "We can't hold this ridge," he said. "Not anymore." Dietrich swallowed. "So retreat on foot?" Reinhardt nodded. "We leave the Panther." Weber lowered his head. "She saved us." Reinhardt let his gloved hand rest on the turret wall. Warm still, from the heat of battle. "She bought us time. The rest is up to us." A dangerous descent. The crew gathered weapons, what little they had left, and dropped from the hull into knee-deep snow. The ridge felt eerily exposed without the Panther's armor enclosing them. Every gust of wind made them flinch. Every branch crack in the forest made them tense. Meissner whispered, "The Soviets will regroup, maybe send scouts." "They will," Reinhardt agreed. "That's why we move fast." They started down a narrow hidden trail Reinhardt had noticed earlier. A depression formed by meltwater beneath the snow. The kind of natural cover infantry rarely checked. Behind them, the crippled Panther stood alone on the ridge, framed by smoke and fire. A monument of steel that had killed 4 tanks and broken 2 infantry attacks without moving a single meter. Dietrich looked back one last time. It's a shame that nobody will believe what happened here. Reinhardt didn't look back. They will when they see the wrecks. Unexpected encounter, friendly forces. As they neared the tree line, faint voices drifted through the forest. German voices. A patrol emerged. Half a dozen soldiers in snow capes. Rifles raised until they recognized the WWII Panther crew. Unteroffizier Reinhardt, the patrol leader, asked, stunned. "We were sent to reinforce. We expected the ridge to be lost." Reinhardt gestured upward. It nearly was. The patrol leader stared at the burning valley, his jaw slackening as he counted the silhouettes. "All that you did that with one panther?" Reinhardt corrected him gently. "With one panther that couldn't move." The patrol leader removed his cap in disbelief. "We thought the Soviets would break through in force. Your stand held them long enough for reserves to arrive." Meissner slapped Reinhardt on the shoulder. "You hear that? We bought them time." Reinhardt nodded, but his expression remained solemn. "Let's finish what's left." A last look at the ridge. The crew climbed onto a troop sled as the patrol prepared to transport them back to German lines. Before the sled moved, Reinhardt took one last glance at the Panther, its silhouette framed against the dawn light breaking over the battlefield. For a moment, the tank looked almost alive again, guarding the ridge, intimidating the frozen valley, still daring the enemy to come forward. Weber whispered, "She died a warrior." Reinhardt nodded slowly. "Better than most of us will." And with that, they left the ridge behind. But the story of what happened there would travel far beyond it. A crippled Panther frozen in place, for enemy tanks destroyed, dozens of infantry halted, a Russian advance delayed long enough to change the direction of a local battle, and a crew who refused to run simply because the machine beneath them had given up. By the time German reserves secured the ridge at Leysen, the snow-covered slope had already begun turning into legend. Smoke curled upward from 5 armor wrecks, for T-34s and a brutally dismembered KV-1, while the burned-out hulk of an Immobile Panther sat like a dark monument in the center of the devastation. Infantrymen who reached the position expected to find a full armor platoon had made the stand. Instead, they found nothing but footprints in the snow, one crew already evacuated, and a tank that would never move again. What Reinhardt and his men accomplished defied battlefield logic. A Panther without mobility is a coffin. A tank crew without maneuvering capability is supposed to abandon their machine, rejoin the line, and survive to fight again. But Reinhardt refused that doctrine. He saw angles where others saw ruin. He saw a firing line in a kill zone. He saw opportunity in immobility. And for 12 brutal minutes, he used a dying Panther to break the momentum of a Soviet armored spearhead. The official German after-action notes read, "Enemy advance delayed due to determined stand by isolated Panther crew." A single line, clinical, unpoetic, insufficient. But among soldiers, the story spread like wildfire. They spoke of a Panther that fought like a fixed gun emplacement, firing with impossible precision. A tank with a broken track that refused to surrender the ridge. A crew who held out until their last shell, then fought their way out through the woods on foot. In the chaotic final months of the Eastern Front, stories like these were lifelines, small flickers of resilience against a tide that was clearly turning. What became of Reinhardt and his crew? After the ridge, Reinhardt's crew continued to serve in scattered rearguard actions, often supporting infantry units too depleted to hold their ground alone. They never received medals for the stand at Leysen. Records were incomplete, units constantly dissolved and reformed, and command structures overwhelmed by retreat. But among armored crews, Reinhardt earned a quiet reputation. The gunner who could read snow like a map. The commander who could hear a tank before he saw it. The man who could turn even a crippled Panther into a weapon. Weber later told a historian, "The tank died on that ridge, but Lukas kept fighting like she was still alive. He believed she had one last battle in her, and she did." Meissner, writing decades later, summarized it best. "People think tanks win battles because of armor or speed. Ours won because the man inside refused to give up. A legacy buried under snow, but not forgotten." The ridge at Leysen today is quiet, just forest and farmland. No burned husks remain, no craters, no blackened steel. But beneath the layers of snow and decades of silence lies a battlefield where a single immobilized Panther delayed an entire Soviet thrust long enough for defenders to regroup. It was an act of defiance, an act of desperation, and above all, an act of exceptional soldiering. A reminder that sometimes the most immovable object on the battlefield isn't a tank, but the will of the crew inside it. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button so more people can discover these cinematic, overlooked World War II battles. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family served. And make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next war story brought to life. ****.